Hello everyone, I'm going to give you an easy and clear to understand and fast rundown of today's patch notes. Alright, so the first thing here in Ranked, the first implications that you might want to know is if you play your placement games, typically the highest rank you can get placed at is Emerald 1. They changed that to Diamond 3. The second implication is that there's a demotion protection between divisions, meaning if you're Silver 2 and you're at 10 LP and now you lose a game and you lose like 20 LP, you will not go to Silver 2 0 LP, no, you will demote to Silver 3 90 LP. I think this is personally fine because it is more fluid and it's more pleasant for people. Because typically if you demote to like 50 LP and now you have to win 2 or 3 games just to get back to your rank. And now it's going to be different. It's going to be a lot easier to climb back to your rank. Then the last thing here, or like the second to last thing here, is demoting from tiers will place players at 25, 50 or 75 LP depending on the player's MMR at that time of the demotion. That is basically saying that, hey, if you have bad MMR currently and you're about to demote from gold to silver, you will go from gold 4 0 LP to silver 1 25 LP if you have bad MMR. You might think this is really bad. This really demotivates if you demote all the way down to 25 LP in the previous rank. But on the longer term, it's actually beneficial. Because if you demote, you're probably losing games, your MMR is going very, very bad. And if you go to 25 LP, it's actually pretty good because now you should be able to win more games. And winning more games in a row is basically the only thing that can help you at improving your MMR. So long-term MMR-wise, I think this is actually a pretty good quality of life adjustment that they added to the game. And the last thing here is, this will not apply to most of you, but if you duo queue in Master right now, that's an option. You can do that. Starting from Grandmaster, you can't, but now you can also duo queue in Master. As for the system changes, here I'm going to give you the TLDR. They basically say, hey, ADCs, supports, and junglers, they are typically underleveled in games. So we're going to buff the early game XP, the duo XP here for support and ADCs so that they catch up in level. And we're going to also buff the early game monster XP. Towards the later stages of the game, they want to nerf the, here you can see it, the late game assisted kill XP because they think that junglers and ADCs are typically very, they typically participate in those late game assisted kill XP. In solo queue, especially in lower elos, I don't think that's true. I think everybody participates in that, as solo queue is very chaotic. So I don't think this is really an implication. I think this will affect everyone and not just the junglers and ADCs. So basically what I mean to say here is ADCs and junglers and supports will basically just be buffed in XP, and that's all there is to it. Then if you go to the goal changes here, the main thing you have to understand is that typically even when you're 110 in League of Legends, if you farm more than your opponents, you might have a bounty just because you're farming well. With this change here, it's going to change the fact that now it's going to be slower. You're going to be building up your bounty slower if you farm well, which is actually really, really good. Then let's take a look at basically the biggest change of the entire patch here, which is Corki's mini rework. Now there's a lot to say here about Corki's mini rework. I'm going to give you the TLDR again. Corki's main thing here is that he's not really going to be a mid laner, but he's more going to be an ADC in the sense that all of his magic damage, that's the first implication, all of his magic damage gets removed. So here if you take a look, instead of doing 20% physical damage and 80% magical damage, he's going to be doing 100% physical damage and 15% true damage. A second implication is his package gets removed. That's why here he gets 15% true damage, quite strong. His other abilities are also quite buffed because his package is removed. I think this is healthy for the game because having up an ability at every 5 minutes that basically guarantees you a team fight or a dragon or a baron, I don't think that's healthy for the game. So I'm glad with this removal. Next to the fact that his package is removed and that he only does physical damage and true damage, it's also very important to note that his ult is working differently. Instead of being able to have 7 rockets, he's going to be doing 4 rockets. He's going to be able to only stack up to 4 rockets at one time. And what that means is that he won't be able to spam as many rockets, so his long range poke is going to be decreased. And on top of that, let's read this. Basic attacks on hit against champions reduce the recharge time of missile barrage, so about his ult, by 2 to 4 seconds. So basically what does this mean is if Corki can get his auto attacks off more, even though he can't stack up as many rockets, he will be able to, even though he can only stack up to 4, he will be able to constantly stack up to 4 because he can reduce the cooldown of his ult quite significantly with auto attacks. This means that Corki right now is a lot more auto attack reliant than, or auto attack based compared to the previous patches. That means that in mid lane, for example, against mages, he will be a lot less strong. So Corki will shine in melee matchups and in melee comps. So for example, when he plays versus a set top, Silas mid, and then Amumu jungle into champions basically who are melee, he is going to be quite good. So he's going to have more of an ADC playstyle And that's basically all that there is to Corki. Now let's move on to Cho'Gath. Nothing important with Cho'Gath. They basically want to, like Riot Games, want to diversify the jungle champs a little bit more. So they buffed Cho'Gath in the jungle, and they also buffed Set in the jungle. Then you may or may not believe this, but they're actually buffing K'Sante. I'm not a big fan of this. I think the champion is already super overtuned. And now they're also buffing him again. So obviously I don't like this. The buff isn't super big, but buffing a champion that's already super strong is ridiculous, and it makes him only stronger, which is not nice. Then if we move on to Scarner, I'm not going to go too in-depth here because there's nothing like really important here. The main thing is that they changed a little bit like his strength against camps, and also his R cast time is decreased, so his ultimate he can do it a little bit quicker. It's more on cooldown, but he is not unstoppable anymore, so you can cancel Scarner ulti at this point. But again, he can now Q other abilities while winding up. So I'm looking forward to seeing a Scarner that's charging his ult while he's going through a wall and then just ulting me. Very looking forward to that, but yeah, we're going to see what that means in game. But other than that, they just changed some numbers here, which isn't super important. Then Tryndamere, not really changed here because they changed the crit items this game. They changed this patch. So they basically made every crit item 25% crit, meaning that you only need 4 items to be 100% crit. Now, with those new crit implications, some champions need adjustment. For example, Tryndamere with his passive needs adjustment. So here, nothing special, it's just an adjustment to let him be okay in the current patch. The same for Yasuo and Yone. Now, Viego, what did they change to Viego? Viego will be more of a lane champion right now. That's the implication of it. Because they buffed his healing versus minions of his Q. So you will see more Viego top and mid lane. It's, in my opinion, viable again. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. Then let's see. Corruption Potion. So when we talk about the items, Corruption Potion is removed. I don't think many people are sorry about this. Not a lot of people want this item. Personally, I think it was a nice flexible option. It's removed from the game. Riot Games doesn't really appreciate items that are not picked a lot, and that's lead to flexibility. But they really promote items that are popular and that people play all the time. So when an item isn't played a lot or used a lot, they just remove it. I don't like that, but yeah, it's removed. Then for the enchanter items, I'm not really going to go too in-depth on here, but this is an item that basically relies on, like, it gives healing and shielding power, and it relies on your base mana regen. So think of champions maybe like Karma, Nami, Lulu, and perhaps even champions like Ivern could actually benefit from this. Then we have Echoes of Helia. It just got a small buff. Shirelia's Battle Song here got a nerf. Shirelia's Battle Song became quite strong in the sense that champions even like Veigar, who could be like considered utility-based champions, also started using this, so they nerfed it slightly. The movement speed took quite a big hit, so support will definitely still run this, I think, but it took a big hit to the point where some utility-based champions might not opt for this anymore. Then if we look at the tank items, Anathema's Chains is removed. Again, this is an item that wasn't really picked a lot, but I think it was nice because it added diversity and flexibility to the game, but it wasn't popular, so Riot banned it. Warmock's armor is buffed in the sense that it's halved, like the health per 5 seconds that you gain is halved, but that's not really why you go Warmock's armor. It's still going to be enough regeneration for you to be happy about it, and they buffed the health from 750 to 1k. You're going to see, but this patch, they very strongly buffed stacking HP over stacking armor. So then that means if they give you an option that gives you more HP in an item, it's going to become more relevant. So I definitely expect Warmock's armor, again, to be a little bit more picked in the current meta. Fimbulwinter got a slight buff, I think. Alright, then we go to the other tank items here. So Bami Cinder, what's the main implication? Ability Haste. Hollow Radiance, Ability Haste. Sunfire Aegis, Ability Haste. So these tank items gain Ability Haste. What do they have to give off for, like, give in for that? HP. 150 less HP, 150 less HP, 100 less HP. So you gain Ability Haste in return for HP. So again, if you combine these items, if you combine like Hollow Radiance with Sunfire Aegis, you might get 20 Ability Haste, which is quite significant and a nice improvement, but you will also lose 300 HP together. So then maybe, because you lose HP here, Warmock's armor could be a great addition here to add into your kit as a tank. Then if we move on, Randuin's Omen, I like and I dislike the changes on this item. Let me explain. So here you lose 50 health, but you also gain 20 armor. I like that, because in League, health doesn't really mean that much. This patch, it's buffed, but it still doesn't mean that much. So giving up 50 health for 20 armor, for 20 resistances, is definitely a worth trade. Then here as well, these two things. So the active where you can slow people, the slow is improved to 70%, which is quite a significant improvement, but the cooldown is prolonged. Now, I don't, it doesn't really matter that the cooldown is prolonged, because Randuin's Omen is not an active that you want to use, like, on repeat. Like, the second it goes on cooldown, you don't use it, right? It's more in specific cases where you want to use it in team fights and things like that. So it's more important that the slow is stronger than that your cooldown is a little bit longer. So it's still, all of this is basically a net buff. But then we have a big implication here. Rock Solid is removed, basically. So this makes the item a little bit less niche, but it makes it more popular and viable in many other cases. So this is actually a pretty good utility-based armor item for a lot of champions, so it's going to be quite more popular than it was right now. But it's also going to be less niche due to Rock Solid being removed. And now I don't think we have an answer into... I don't think we have an item to replace Rock Solid passive actually that well. So yeah, we're going to have to go with Randuin's Omen now. Like I said, it's going to be more popular, but in those niche situations where we would have wanted Rock Solid, it's not there anymore. Then Unending Despair, I would say it's a net nerf because they removed Ingenious Hunter. Obviously, this item depended a lot on Ingenious Hunter, so they buffed it slightly, but I don't think this weighs up for the nerf here. So yeah, we're going to see about that, but I think it's a net nerf. Abyssal Mask got changed a lot in the sense that here, this is the main implication. It got cheaper, you gain less magic resist, but you deal more, like you reduce more magic resist, right? Instead of minus 8.6 to 25 magic resist based on your bonus HP, you can now reduce minus 20% magic resist at all times, which is really, really strong. The radius also has increased, and you gain a little bit more magic resist here per enemy. Now, since this is minus 20% magic resist, this is very, very strong. You obviously can't combine this with Void Staff or Crit Bloom, because otherwise you would literally do true damage to your opponents. Knight's Vow, nothing has really changed here. Nothing super important. Zeke's Convergence, you now also gain magic resist, so this might be quite important, but the mana is removed. Then if you go to Mage Items, Banshee's Veil, nothing has really changed. They just made the build path in terms of gold a little bit more accessible. A new item for the mages, Blackfire Torch. What's the implication of this? What is this item? What does it do? Very simple. It's basically a Liandry's that also gives you mana. Right? It burns people, right, with the damage over time, just like Liandry's, but it gives you a lot of mana. And the great thing about it, it has Fated Ashes as a component here. And this component, for example, it deals damage over time, but also bonus damage per second to monsters. So this is also important in the jungle clear. So champions like Karthus, Lilia, champions like that, like maybe Brand, can benefit a lot from this item. And then in the mid lane, you also have champions like Malzahar and stuff who can benefit a lot from this burn, because those are also champions who not only want to burn people, but they also benefit from the mana. Now, something that's extremely OP here on this item is that for each enemy champion, epic monster and large monster affected by your Baleful Blaze, which is this here, dealing damage with abilities to enemies, gain 4% AP. So to me, this looks extremely OP. So I'm currently thinking of an Asol who's like ulting an entire team, and then this goes times 5, so 20% extra AP. If you already have a death cap, that becomes ridiculous. Then Fated Ashes, like I said, was the component. Luden's Companion got a nerf, a well-deserved nerf. I think this item was very weak for a long time. They nerfed it, so now the stacking mechanism where you have to wait until you have like 6 shots is gone. You always fire at 6 shots, but as a compensation, there is a cooldown now of 12 seconds. But I think overall this is good because the damage also improved here. So this is going to be great for champions who play with bursts, and those are typically mages, and mages typically go Luden's Companion. So almost for all mages like Syndra or LeBlanc even, this is going to be great. Then Liandry's Torment, no many big changes here. Here you can read though, as a mana item option, the new epic item Faded Ashes is swapped in as a component. This could be quite important to know. But other than that, nothing special here. Verdant Barrier, basically the same. And then here we have the fighter items, Overlord's Bloodmail. 2 main implications that you have to understand of this item. You will gain 2% of your bonus health as attack damage. Think of champions like Cho'Gath, who gain bonus health due to his ult, for example. And then he will gain that as attack damage, which could be very, very strong. Think of champions like Sion as well. Then Retribution, gain up to 10% increased attack damage based on your percent missing health. And then you have the maximum damage below when you're below 30% health. This is very important. This is for champions, typically for tanks. Why? Because you will gain the maximum damage here if you lose, like if you are like below 30% health. So then you need to think what type of champion can still consistently deal damage and use this increased attack damage when they are below 30% health. Because if you play an ADC below 30% health, you might be like 400 HP or something or lower. And then, yeah, you're not in a position anymore to like deal damage. But a tank below 30% health might still have like 2k HP or more, and then they can definitely still benefit from that. So definitely think of tankier champions, like a Mundo, for example, will definitely be able to use this. Okay, then we go to Blade of the Rune King. Also some implications with Blade of the Rune King. They basically buffed the base stats, like attack damage increased, attack speed and lifesteal, but they nerfed the on-hit. So it went from 12% to 9% for melee, and it went from 9% to 6% for ranged. So this basically means if you play versus squishy targets, it's probably buffed. If you play versus tankier targets, it's probably nerfed. Because against tankier targets, that's when the passive, the on-hit, the current physical health damage was important. But not against super squishy targets, so then this is probably going to be better. But like I said, if you play versus tanks, you're going to do less current physical health damage. And that obviously means that, yeah, it's going to be less good against tanks. That here we have the passive Clawing Shadows. Instead of doing damage every first, like instead of slowing people and proccing it at every first attack, it's now going to proc every third basic attack on hit. And it's always going to be 30%. Whether you do it against, whether you're a melee or range champion, it's always going to slow people 30%. And yeah, the main implication here of this is, so now it was that if you attack somebody with Blade of Rune King, you slow them immediately. Now it's going to be that you slow them on the third basic attack, which is, in my opinion, quite a good change for some champions and quite a bad change for other champions. Let's say you play Vayne into a team fight and you attack something like an Ornn. Like, you don't struggle with attacking the Ornn, you can just constantly attack him. So then, do you need to slow initially to stay onto him? No. Right? Then it's better that you can kite him and slow them at your third attack while you're already kiting him a little bit to increase the distance again against you. Because typically what happens when you kite somebody as an ADC, for example, you attack them and then they slowly come closer to you. But if the slow applies to them in the middle of your trade, now you can get away again. So I think it's better actually for kiting. However, some champions struggle with even getting onto other champions in the first place. So those champions might just want to attack somebody, now they're slowed, and now they can stay onto them. So for some champions it's going to be a nerf, for other champions it's going to be a buff. I think for most ADCs it's actually a buff here, specifically in this here, and how this works now. But overall I think Blade of Rune King got a nerf, because typically it's used against tankier champions. But like for champions like Irelia or something, I think it's actually a buff in the early game. Then we go to Black Cleaver. Black Cleaver, I don't think it's super strong. It has never really been that strong lately. But yeah, now instead of at max 25%, you're going to have 30% max armor reduction. This is quite significant actually. So it might put Black Cleaver a little bit more on people's radar. Then we go to the boots. And the main change here in the boots of plated steel caps is going to be that it costs you less gold. And the armor is increased. So this basically means you should be able to build plated steel caps now more in your games more often than in the previous patch, because it's less gold and it gives you more armor. The only thing is, it's going to be less good against ADCs and just people who like to auto attack you, because the basic attack reduction damage from 12% goes to 8%, which is quite significant. So let's say you play versus team comps who have many ADCs, like Kindred Jungle, Twitch, bot, and support. Then yeah, you're going to have less benefit from plated steel caps as before. But again, they're going to be less good in those niche situations, but they're going to be better overall in your game, so you should pick them more often. Then Boots of Mobility is completely removed from the game, and they have basically a alternative which is called Symbiotic Souls, which can be upgraded automatically into Synchronized Souls. So the implication here of Symbiotic Souls is basically it's 900 gold, 35 movement speed, your recall is empowered, so it's pretty decent for supports who want to roam and stuff. But then this here is difficult to interpret. After traveling 150,000 units, upgrades to Synchronized Souls. And then here, instead of 35 movement, you will gain 45 movement speed, recall still empowered. So here, what I think is quite important to know is, I think this looks pretty fine in stats, but how long does it take to upgrade it into this? I don't know that. If it's going to be relatively long, I think these are going to be useless. But if this is 150,000 units, which sounds a lot, but if it's short, then I think this is pretty fine. But I don't think a lot of people will build this anyway. Then the biggest change here, or like the most changes, is going to be about marksman items. Before we start with marksman items, you need to know that they changed the crit items from 20% to 25%. The main implication about that means that ADCs will now be able to get 100% crit after building 4 items instead of 5 items. This makes them spike earlier and leaves more room in their kit to build items that are more niche and that can be more situational and help them out in the later stages of the game. So in my opinion here, ADCs will probably either just rush Bloodthirster or Infinity Edge, because what's the common thing about these items? Bloodthirster gives you 80 AD and Infinity Edge also gives you 80 AD here, which these two items give you a lot of AD, so they're very good at rushing items. And then what is the main difference? Well, Bloodthirster, here you can see, it doesn't have any crit anymore. But as a compensation, we do get the shield again from the previous seasons. So it converts access healing from lifesteal into a shield. Meaning if you're full HP and you lifesteal from anything, any source, you will gain that as a shield above on top of your HP bar. So it's basically going back to the old Bloodthirster here. So this is going to be a great item to rush for champions like Draven perhaps, who benefit from lifesteal. And then another, like if people need crit, because this doesn't give you crit anymore, if people need crit over lifesteal, then they will probably just rush Infinity Edge over Bloodthirster. Now the reason why I'm also talking about rushing Bloodthirster or IE is because this patch they changed something in the sense that Riot said, we're either going to give you items that give you AD and crit, or we're going to give you items that give you attack speed and crit. But items that give you AD won't give you attack speed anymore, and items that give you attack speed won't give you AD anymore. The problem with that is, as an ADC, you don't want to rush an attack speed item as your first item. That doesn't feel good to farm, and it doesn't feel good to trade. So you need kind of an AD item. And now, since that Bloodthirster and Infinity Edge are 80 AD, they are your main AD first items that you should choose. That's why people should rush them. And then if you're a champion who benefits from lifesteal, you can go Bloodthirster. And if you're a champion who benefits from crit, then you can go Infinity Edge as your first item. Then Collector basically stayed the same, nothing really has changed. Essence Reaver, it's a weird change in my opinion what they did. So Essence Reaver, the first thing that they did is there's no longer a Spellblade item. Now, for the people of you who don't know what a Spellblade item is basically Sheen. Sheen built into Essence Reaver, and what's the implication of Sheen? If you do an ability, your next auto attack will be empowered. So Essence Reaver was great for champions who rely on abilities. Let's think of Ezreal. Ezreal constantly wants to Q. But then if you Q, due to the Sheen, due to the Spellblade here in Essence Reaver, your next auto attack will do empowered damage. Think of Lucian as well. This was also really good on Lucian. On Nyla, for example, because on Nyla as well, you Q and then you auto attack. So then your auto attack would always be empowered, right? So it really is really good on those champions. But the problem is that's gone. So those champions wouldn't really benefit from that. Now, what is really good that they added? Basic attacks refund mana. So this is again a reverse. This used to be back in the days. So basic attacks will refund mana. Now, why do I say that this is ironic? Because the champions that I just mentioned, Nyla, Lucian, these are champions that uses abilities, right? So Sheen is really good on them, but they removed it. So you don't really want to go Essence Reaver anymore. Yet one of their main weaknesses was that since they rely on doing abilities first, they cost a lot of mana. Right? Like Lucian uses a lot of mana. So now this item fixes that, but then it removes Spellblade, right? So now as Lucian, you're like, okay, this is not as good anymore because I don't have the Spellblade anymore, but I do get the mana. So you get like something that you really need, but you also lose something that you really need. Now, since there aren't really any other options to go Sheen on Lucian and on Nyla, for example, I think, or you have to revert to like something like Trinity Force, but I don't see that happening. I think you still go Essence Reaver just for the mana because it gives you more mana, and that also allows you to trade more. But you're gonna have to play a little bit less off of burst and more off of just doing more trades. Or you could also rush items like Infinity Edge. Right? That's also something those champions could do. Then Immortal Shield Bow. I think Immortal Shield Bow is extremely weak. The problem with Immortal Shield Bow is it gives you a shield. And why is that shield good? Because it gives you lifesteal, right? Up until now, Immortal Shield Bow gave you a shield and lifesteal. That's the beauty of it. A shield on itself is useless. Raw shield, raw HP is literally useless. People melt through that, especially in the later stages of the game. But if you have resistances or lifesteal or any form to basically help you out in terms of survivability, then the shield becomes a lot more powerful. But they removed here all the lifesteal. So now you have a shield, but no resistances anymore. So it's kind of useless. So the shield doesn't really matter. And it only gives you 25% crit and 55 AD. So in my opinion, this item is just completely useless and you should never build it. At this point, if you need more resistances, just build a Hex Drinker or build a tank item, but anything to avoid building a shield bow. And then we go to Infinity Edge. I already talked about this item. It gives you 80 and crit. So it's going to be an item that a lot of ADCs are going to rush as their first item, because then as a second item, they can start rushing their attack speed items. Here, this item is removed. I don't really care about this, honestly. Then we have Kraken Slayer, and Kraken Slayer, the main implication is you have more movement speed, more attack damage, more attack speed, but you do not have your critical strike chance anymore. Now, Kraken Slayer is really good because of its build path. Now, it's not as good as its build path. That's one. And two, it doesn't give you crit anymore. Since people only need 4 items for crit right now, then the people who would want to go crit are typically not going to rush Kraken Slayer. They're going to wait with it, because they're first going to make sure that they have their 100% crit and spike early. And then perhaps as a 5th or 6th item, they can potentially pick up a Kraken Slayer if they need to. Now, some champions like Bel'Veth, for example, can also still rush this item because the stats have improved, yet it doesn't give any crit anymore, but Bel'Veth doesn't really rely on crit anymore. So champions who don't rely on crit anymore as much might perhaps even benefit from these changes. Then we move on to Lord Dominic's Regards. This is a very big, significant change. And the reason, like here, if you look at it, armor penetration went 5% up, which is quite significant. Critical strike chance obviously went up, attack damage went up, but then no longer deals the increased damage based on target's max health advantage. This is called the Giant Slayer passive, where if you play versus a Sign who has a lot more max health than you, you could deal up to extra 15% damage on top of the armor penetration. So what was the implication of the Lord Dominic's Regards like up until now? The implication was that it's super broken, or that it was super broken, because not only did it give you armor penetration, but it was also good against stacking HP. So for example, a Scion who likes to stack HP could easily get shredded by Lord Dominic's Regard. Why? Because again, you deal more damage, 15% more damage, like at the maximum, against people with more max health than you. So even if they stack HP, you can relatively easily stack, like shred through that HP. And then the Scion could say, okay, with Lord Dominic's Regards, he can easily shred through my HP, so now I'm going to build armor. But the armor penetration is also 35, or was 35%. So you could also shred through their armor. So now they fixed that. Now they said, we're going to increase your armor penetration so that when you play versus a Sign who is stacking armor, you're still going to be able to shred through him. But if you play versus a Sign or a Cho'Gath or any Amundo who stack HP rather than armor, now you're going to have a hard time shredding through them, because the Giant Slayer combo is completely gone. So that's going to take a lot longer for you to kill those very high healthy, like high HP champions who are not necessarily stacking armor. So killing a Scion, basically, a Zac Amundo, is going to be quite a bit more difficult with the current Lord Dominic's Regards. And then you could argue, okay, but maybe I can build Blade of Rune King then. Yes, that's true. Why? Because Blade of Rune King, it gives you current physical health damage. Meaning that if you play versus a Scion at 8k HP, then you will still do a relatively good amount of damage because you deal damage based on their current health, right? So if they're full HP, then you do a lot of damage with your Blade of Rune King. If they're low HP, then you don't deal a lot of damage with your Blade of Rune King. So it's pretty good against tanks. But they also nerfed that this patch. So here they removed the item that deals damage against high HP stacking champions. And Blade of Rune King got nerfed, which also makes it more difficult right now to shred through a Sign, through a Mundo, through a Zac. So these are very important implications. And now remember when I said, hey, Warmox, if you go all the way back here to Warmox, don't know where it was, but I said, I think that Warmox will have a place this meta. And the reason for that is, look here, the HP increased. And HP is more important this meta because it's buffed, because it's harder for ADCs and enemies to shred through you if you stack HP. So a Warmox buff here is not only good individually, but it's also good considering that it's going to be more difficult to shred through HP. Now, with that being said, let's go back to the items here that we were talking about. Yes, so we were at Lord Dominic's Regards. Now let's move to Mercurial Simitar. The main implication about Mercurial Simitar, they removed the crit strike and they gave you life steal, which is good. Because critical strike chance, those items are items that you want to build early on because they're core items. You need crit. Most ADCs need crit. But that doesn't make sense because the item is very niche. The item gives you like a Quicksilver stash, like a built-in cleanse that you don't need every game. So you're basically, if you build this item, you're spending gold on an item, and it also gave you magic resist. So you're spending gold on an item that you don't always need. That's not even good in your situation sometimes, but it gives crits, so that's why you might build it anyway. Now they said, no, we're done with that. We're going to remove the critical strike chance. And we're going to give it a lifesteal, which makes it a lot more of a niche, good item, actually, than giving it critical strike chance. So I really like this change. Then Mortal Reminder. Mortal Reminder is just the same. They just adjusted it for the critical strike system. So nothing new here. Then Navori Quick Blades changed to Navori Flicker Blades. This sounds like a really weird name in my opinion, but it is what it is. Basically the iconics cooldown reduction mechanics stay the same. So that's completely fine, or it stays relatively the same, so that's completely fine. And it also gives you movement speed, and it gives you 40% attack speed, but the ability haste and attack damage is removed, so it's an attack speed item right now. But in my opinion, that's really, really good. That's really, really fine, because nowadays ADCs, like I said, they want to rush IE, they want to rush Bloodthirster, so especially for the champions who want to rush IE for the critical strike chance, then you need some kind of attack speed afterwards, and then a Navori Flicker Blade can give you that 40% attack speed, while also giving you cooldown reduction mechanics. So yeah, that's really, really good. Then the Noon Quiver, I already talked about this. It gives you critical strike chance, but the passive is removed. So the problem with this is that people who want this item, like in the bot lane, for example, their push will slow down. And in the jungle, you also have people who rush Kraken Slayer, for example. Think of a Viego or a Bel'Veth. Their clear will also slow down a little bit. Then we go to Phantom Dancer, which is, in my opinion, the most broken item in the game right now. For 2.6k gold, you will gain 12% movement speed, 25% crit, and 60% attack speed. And now comes the funny part. You also still have the ghosting passive as well from Phantom Dancer. But let's look at this. Also 2.6k gold, also crit, but only 35% attack speed. So here you gain extra 12% movement speed and 35% and 60% attack speed. So 12% movement speed, 60% attack speed for the same gold. That here you get 35% attack speed, which is basically useless. So the passive of Rapid Fire Cannon that you get like more range is not worth it to skip Phantom Dancer or to skip any of these items. Just don't build Rapid Fire Cannon. Like it's not worth to go this range, the extra range for this item, because the stats suck. Just don't go it. Then Renunciation Hurricane, this item here we can read it. With it dropping the on-hit but gaining power on the bolts and showing itself as the first AoE option amongst crit and attack speed items. So they basically dropped, or they removed even the on-hit magic damage, but increased the bolt AD damage scaling. Quite a bit actually. So that could be interesting to think about. Static Shift, I've never really been a fan of this item. But I like the fact that it's no crit item anymore. And the reason why I like that is in bot lane, it was a meta to go Static Shift. But now, since we only need 4 items to get to 100% crit, and we can spike early, we're not going to go Static Shift if it doesn't give critical strike chance. So it doesn't give critical strike chance, which makes it not viable anymore in the bot lane. So I like that. However, instead it gives more attack speed, and it has 2 extra parts. Killing non-champions fires Chain Lightning, Jesus Christ, that deals 90 magic damage hitting up to 6 additional targets. This is just the Chain Lightning. I don't think it's that special actually, but then the next one sounds a bit weird. Electroshock takedowns on champions instead it deals ×3 damage and has no cooldown, no bounce cap, and 650 bounce range. So this sounds like on Jinx perhaps this could perhaps be okay. But I'm not sure. I don't really know what they mean with this. So I'm going to have to see how this works in game. But before we do that, before you do that, let's look what they say here so that we can get a better understanding of the item. Static Shift is trading its energized pattern for a brand new on-kill effect. It's also no longer a crit item, but instead provides a good mix of attack damage and attack speed for champs trying to stabilize early on. It will still help with wave clear in its own way, plus potentially really shock opponents in a favorable team fight. Yeah, so again, like in a team fight, I can see this work. Perhaps on Jinx, this could be kind of broken. And the fact that it gives you and attack speed and attack damage, it's one of the only items that does that. So it's normal that it doesn't give crit, but it's one of the only items that does that. So definitely some champions will be wanting to rush this item. Then Stormraiser is removed. I think that's healthy. This item was unhealthy for the game. You get builds like a vein-going Stormraiser into Trinity Force, and now she's untouchable, and she's sprinting at you like she's a damn train. So I think it's good that this is out the game. Terminus, nothing really changed. I would say a slight buff. Voltaic Cyclosword, also I don't think anything changed here, so this is completely fine. a new item here, Yuntal Wild Arrows, which I think is going to be quite fun. Now let's read this together. So this is here the main implication of this item. Critical strikes deal 35% total AD, physical damage, over 2 seconds. So 2 components here. The damage, your critical strike chances, your critical strikes will deal more damage based on your total AD, and the damage goes off over 2 seconds. So it's a damage over time and based on your total AD. So what champions will this be good for? Champions who stack high AD, like a Jhin, for example, or maybe a Draven. Champions who have a lot of like high AD can definitely benefit from this. I'm thinking of maybe a Rengar could even probably pull this off. Like a crit Rengar build could probably be very, very strong with this. And then something else I would think about, since the damage goes off over 2 seconds, I think this is really, really good for people who can consistently critically strike you. So people with a lot of attack speed, for example, maybe a Tryndamere could do this, right? Tryndamere likes to also have high AD, so he could do a lot of damage, and he can consistently proc it. So the damage over time is also not really a problem. So I think, yeah, you have to take these 2 things into account. But yeah, champions like Tryndamere, Nyla, Jhin, Draven can definitely benefit from this item a lot. Then we have Zafir or Zafir, however you want to call it. Basically, if you buy Berserker Greaves at level 15, you can upgrade it into this item. What's the main implication of this? Typically, like let's say you're in ADC, you have Berserker Greaves, and you're full build. You're in late game, you are full build. You're thinking, okay, how can I become stronger to win the next team fight and win my game? By selling my boots and building a full item. Problem with that is, okay, but if I sell my item and I build a new one like to become stronger, then maybe I lack the movement speed to carry the fight. Because the stats are nice, but if I have 0 movement speed, I might just die and get picked off. Right. So instead, you can upgrade to Zafir or Zafir, whatever. And that will give you 45 attack speed percent and 45 move speed here as well. Which is really, really good, actually. So here, passive gain 5% movement speed for 6 seconds, stacking up to 15%. So this is basically a full item that mainly focuses on your attack speed and movement speed, which is really good for ADC. So I think this could be a fix in those late game games where you really need mobility and you want a little bit extra strength, stats. So this is really good in those situations. Then a Hardbound Axe. I don't think a lot of implications here. I would say it's a slight nerf on the item. Recurve Bow also slightly nerfed. Damage type on hit here. Just to explain you, it went from magical on hit to physical on hit damage, meaning that in the early game, champions have typically more armor than magic resist. So this is a slight nerf. Scouts Slingshot. This item will give you like here attack speed, and this is just for the crit items that give you attack speed. This is basically just a component of that. So they invented this a component to come up with the new stats on the crit items. So this is just basically a quality of life update. Zeal, also just a component, got buffed quite a bit, but this is just normal because, yeah, it's for the new crit items, so the crit has to go up. And then here the dagger got nerfed a little bit. Then we can go to summoner spells. Main implication here, Ghost got nerfed, the cooldown went up and the duration went down, so I think this is a very significant nerf, especially considering that it already got nerfed a couple of patches ago. So now we're going to be looking at Cleanse and Exhaust as a replacement for Ghost, perhaps. Now, before we do that, Barrier also went up with half a second. This means that it's harder for people to outplay you when you have Barrier. And the shield went slightly up. I don't think this buff is enough to make it really viable, but it's decent, I would say. And then Heal, the range that you can heal allies is a little bit wider, but again, I don't think this makes Heal strong enough to compete with Cleanse and Exhaust. Now, if we look at Cleanse, the cooldown went up with half a minute, but your Tenacity also went up with 10%. Cleanse is an item, or is a summoner spell that you don't want to use on repeat, but like in those crucial moments in teamfights. And then it's important that you have the strongest cleanse possible, that you should have the strongest amount of tenacity possible. It doesn't really matter that you can use cleanse every like 4 minutes or whatever. It's very, very important that, or like every 2 minutes, whatever. It's very important that you can, when you use cleanse, that it's useful, that you get use out of it. So making it stronger is important. That's the same for exhaust. Cooldown went up, but also the slow. So again, once you have those summoner spells, you don't use them on repeat. But once you use them, or when you use them, they need to be extremely valuable, and that's what they're fixing. So they're definitely buffing these summoner spells. So, summary, Ghost nerfed, Cleanse and Exhaust buffed, definitely high competing summons now with Ghost, and Barrier and Heal still kind of look shit. Domination, Rune Tree here. So if you're going to look at the runes, Predator is removed. Do with that information what you will. I personally think it's a pity because it gave some flexibility to the game, but basically also some like stupid playstyles, so maybe it's not even that bad. Then Hail of Blades is nerfed on ranged champions. Think of champions like Kai'Sa that wants to go Hail of Blades sometimes, or Varus like Lethality Varus, or in the mid lane, something like Tristana or Azir. Yeah, those kind of champions. Ingenious Hunter is removed, but a lot of people didn't really go this anyway, so it's not really that big of a problem. But again, it gives flexibility to the game, but Riot doesn't really like that. So then Impact slightly got nerfed. Nothing like it's a net nerf, but you can still go it, but it slightly got nerfed. Relentless Hunter also slightly got nerfed here. Again, this is normal. It's normal, in my opinion, that they nerf Ghost and that they nerf Relentless Hunter, because now inherently the attack speed items in the game have like 7% movement speed, 12% movement speed. That's a lot, and that can stack up. So you have to nerf movement speed somewhere else to compensate for that, and that's what's happening here. Then in the Precision Rune Tree, a very big change. Lethal tempo is completely removed. A lot of champions, a lot of ADCs rely on this. Also champions like Yasuo and Yone. In the top lane, you have champions like Jax who suffer from this. So yeah, a lot of champions will suffer from this, but Riot gave us Press the Attack, a new version of it. So let's read it together. Hitting an enemy champion with 3 consecutive basic attacks deals bonus adaptive damage, which is just the normal. PTA was already like this. But now, once you've done that, it amplifies your damage by 8% until you leave combat, which is insane. So basically, you will gain an 8% damage buff until you leave combat. So whether you attack the same target that you used to proc your press attack on, or you go to another target that you attack, it doesn't matter. As long as you stay in combat, you will have 8% attack damage increased, which is kind of insane. It's like an inherent buff to your champion, which is really, really insane. Then we go to the other runes here. So Overheal is removed from the game. Instead, you can get something like Absorb Life. Now, what does Absorb Life do? Now, also, before I go to here, Overheal is removed from the game, but like Bloodthirster gives you the Overheal shield now. So maybe that's an alternative for other champs. And here, Absorb Life. Basically, what this rune does is when you trade with your opponent and both of you get low, you could go this rune and then you will heal from killing targets. So, for example, you trade with your opponent, both of you are 50% HP. But you did the trade knowing that you have Absorb Life in your rune. So now when you farm minions, both of you, you will heal up quicker than your opponent. And now you might get to 60% HP when your opponent is only at 54% HP or something. And this way you can maybe even out trades. However, how significant the healing from this is difficult to say, because it says 2 to 17 based on levels, but I would have to know how much you get per level. But I don't think it's going to be super, super good. I think it's going to be just mediocre and maybe not even that strong. We're going to see. Then Legend Tenacity is removed. So Tenacity is basically reduced, but we gain Legend Haste, which means that we will have more ability haste in our games. And this is really nice. And I think the main reason why they did this is in Sorcery Rune Tree, you have Transcendence, which also gives you ability haste. But now you can get that when you go into Conqueror Rune Tree. So now when you go like Conqueror or anything else, you're not forced to go into Sorcery Rune Tree anymore, just for Transcendence. Now it's also in the Conqueror Rune Tree, and then you can have a nicer secondary Rune Tree, which I think is really, really nice. So yeah, this change is something I do appreciate, and you will get quite a lot of ability haste from this. Cut down, a very big change, a very important change, a very good change. So now what it's going to do is you're going to deal 8% increased damage to champions above 60% health. So basically, imagine an ADC who goes press the attack, who is in a fight, who has 8% amplified damage, and add this up to that. Now they will do 16% damage to champions who have above 60% maximum health, which is kind of crazy, right? That is kind of good. So I think this could be a great option instead of coup de grace and last stand. Then we go to Fleet Footwork. Fleet Footwork is both buffed and nerfed, but you need to understand why I say that. So the heal is nerfed, so you get less healing from Fleet Footwork. So you could say, isn't that like a big nerf? Like, isn't the reason that we go Fleet Footwork for the extra healing and sustain? Well, yes, but movement speed got slightly buffed as well. So movement speed is also a form of sustain in the sense that if you dodge an ability due to more movement speed, now you took less damage. So this having more movement speed could even be more important than the heal. The problem is, then you need to be able to use Fleet Footwork with its movement speed. If you don't do that, if you just play around it for the heal, then it's going to be a nerf. If you have the skill to play around it with movement speed, Obviously, it might be a slight buff, but I think overall for the most people, it's going to be a slight nerf. Then we have the Resolve Rune Tree here. Font of Life, I've read this, but I don't think it's super significant. I think it's just like not a lot of people buy this, use this Font of Life rune anyway. And I don't think it's significantly improved. So nothing much to say here. Inspiration Rune Tree, a lot to say here. So they rearranged the inspiration trees, which is very important. Because here you have the rows, right? If you have an inspiration tree, you have rows on the inspiration tree. And that means that if you have 3 things on the same row, you can only select 1. So they changed what mini runes are on what row. So now that means that some runes that you might want to take, you can't because there's 2 runes on the same row that you want, but you can only take 1. So that's the major implication about that. So Futures Market is removed. I think that's a pity. I think it had its use case. It was really fun, but it was also a little bit unhealthy for the game. So I understand it. Cashback, a new one that they added. You get 6% gold back on a purchase of a legendary item. I don't think that's that good. I think it's like not super good, not even mediocre. It's probably pretty weak. But yeah, it's a mini rune. You might as well take it. It's not going to lose you or win you the game anyway. Minion DMAT is also completely removed. This is a pity. But also I think this is a bit unhealthy for the game. Champions who had already great wave clear could even buff their wave clear with this. And in general, I think this is like a way to, again, make the game a little bit unhealthy. So I'm glad it's out of the game. Then Jack of all trades. It says it here twice for some reason. But this is really weird. For each unique stat on items you have purchased, get a stacking bonus. So for example, if your champion has attack speed, you get 1 stat. If you have AD, that's a 2nd stat. If you have ability haste, that's a 3rd stat. If you have movement speed, that's a 4th stat. And then per stack, you get 1 ability haste. At 5 stacks, you will get extra adaptive force. And at 10 stacks, you will get even more adaptive force. But the numbers here are super insignificant. And 2, like they're so insignificant that they're only strong if you can get it in the early game. But what champion is going to get like 10 different stacks in the early game? It's not even going to be significant. So to me, this looks really bad. Right? Now, if you look at what row that is, so that is at the row of Approach Velocity and Cosmic Insight. Cosmic Insight is a rune where you want to, like, where you reduce your summoner spell cooldown, basically, like your flash cooldown. This is 10 times better than Jack of all trades. So don't go Jack of all trades, go Cosmic Insight. And then here the cashback is on the row of Magical Footwear and Hextech Flash Traptation. So if you don't play a support, you typically don't want to take Hes Flash. And then Magical Footwear is just going to be better than cashback. Unless you're in a matchup where you need to buy boots early on to dodge skill shots. Then you're not going to buy this and then you can go cashback. That's the only reason why I would go cashback. Then we have Triple Tonic, Time Warp Tonic, and Biscuit Delivery. And then yeah, from this row you can basically choose whatever. I think they're somewhat equal. So here, Time Warp Tonic, new. It no longer reduces the healing of potions, which is really important because Time Warp Tonic beforehand basically was, okay, you get your healing more instantaneous, but therefore you also get less healing initially. And so now that's gone, so you get still the full healing of the potion, and the upfront healing is actually also improved, which is something I really liked. And then it removed the bonus movement speed for the duration of potions. I honestly don't think this was useful, but it's fine. I think this is still a pretty good buff. Then First Strike, lowering the ceiling for gold gain while bringing up the floor. So gold gained in most games should remain the same, while someone snowballing will not be able to spike gold to an unhealthy degree. So basically what did they do? They increased the damage, the percentage damage early on, right? Here, so they put it early on, like and the gold as well. Like they basically, not the damage, but they improved like the gold gained early on. And the damage amplification also went up here, right? So I would say this is basically a buff to First Strike. It's also a little bit of a nerf, but I would say it's a net buff, I think. Because here it says gold gain in most games should remain the same, right? So then I think it's going to be somewhat even slightly above. And then we have ARAM balance changes and all that stuff, so I'm not going to look at that. This was everything of the runes, the items, the champions, everything, rank it. So this was that. So I'm going to end the video here to make sure it doesn't take like 20 hours. So thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and yeah, enjoy the new patch, enjoy the new season.